All right. Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to LinkedIn Live. My name is Monique and I go by the Student Support Coach. So tonight our topic is everyone needs tier three. We might want to talk about tier one. So we are definitely talking about some tier one tonight. If you don't know, I have a background as a professional school counselor. I've done that for over a decade. And I've also served as a district student services coordinator. Within that role, I've actually helped establish therapeutic partnerships, coordinated partner programs for social emotional groups and case management, and built strong partnerships with our SPED staff and SPED department. So, this is going to be very relevant for our conversation tonight. But now, what I do is I work as a school mental health consultant and I help K through 8 student support staff transform discipline into positive social emotional development. And so, like I said, I'm very excited for the conversation tonight. But why are we having this conversation? I just want to say, y'all, because I know most of you that I invited tonight are administrators. There are certain conversations that mental health professionals have when administrators leave the room. Now, in some school settings, depending on the relationship with the administrator, administrators are in the conversation. But in some school settings, when that door closes between your mental health partners and your school mental health professionals, there's a conversation that happens. And it has everything to do with referrals. So, and I'm talking specifically about referrals for therapy, case management, um, and sometimes SPED. Okay. Now, the conversation that we're usually having is about the high referral rate. And we know that if referrals are high for those type of services or supports, is typically because the school-wide supports are not as strong as they could be. So it's an example if we're referring or skipping to tier three, right? And those school wide supports are not strong, it's like adding more lifeguards to the pool when nobody has taught people how to swim. Again, what did you think about that? If you're referring a lot of kids to tier three and your tier one supports aren't strong, it's like adding more lifeguards to the pool when nobody has taught people how to swim. And so, like I said, that kind of secret circle between the mental health professionals, we know that the referrals shouldn't be that high, regardless of it being, a school mental health crisis. But like I said, depending on how open an administrator or a school leader is, there needs to be more consistent conversations about, hey, how can we get these referrals down? Because not everybody needs therapy or case management or to be working with the community partners. Some of these things can be handled in house, and we'll get to that in a second. But my question for you is if you were to rank the strength of your school wide supports, one being barely existent and 10 being extremely strong, where would you rank it? Again, if you were to rank the strength of your school wide supports, one being barely existent and 10 being extremely strong, where would you rank it? Because I think a part of this conversation is having some awareness, right? Or just being kind of open and upfront about where are we right now and actually where do we want to go, right? So, like I said, we're talking about tier one tonight. And so, before we even talk about students and what the students need and X, Y, and Z, we have to talk about building adult capacity. Now, I'm going to say this once and I'm going to say it again later, but your own staff can either help or be a hindrance to student needs. Okay, so it's important that they understand what behaviors are age appropriate, what is a trauma response, and what behavior skills can be developed. At a base, these are really important things for all of your staff to know, not just teaching staff, but all of your staff. In every school that I've worked in, I've coordinated with support staff, so your school counselors, social workers, school psychologists, etc., to teach the following concepts. I'll give you free game right now. The escalation cycle, impact of trauma in schools, and processing student needs. Those are typically, again, fundamental or a base of knowledge that all staff within a school should know, regardless of position. Now, like I said, this is also a great opportunity for you in some way to find a way to assess what your staff already know around those three concepts so that you're not having all of your staff sit in a gym together and then 60% of your staff already know what the escalation cycle is. So you want to build professional learning that is specific to what the need is. But again, that should be the base. Now, as we talk about the gym professional development, right? Because a lot of times the school counselor is pulled into that, the social workers are pulled in that, and they're just like, I already know that stuff. Not every time, but most of the time because their roles already are ingrained in student needs, psychology, and all of that. Most of the time they come in already knowing that information, but they still need training. Your support staff, however, you should be encouraging them to seek out training that is specific to the needs of your school. So we talk about ROI, return on investment, of like, why would I uh, have this person go out? They have a master's, they have a certification, they already have X, Y, and Z. Yes, but this is a great opportunity for there to be a conversation between you as a school leader and your student support staff about, hey, based off of the students that you served last year or based off of your data, right? What do you feel like is a need as far as professional learning? Because it could be that you're sending people to get training on facilitating small groups. It could be more training on how to provide content on executive functioning, how to facilitate goal setting with students. It really depends on, again, your specific staff members, what they already know, and specifically, what are you seeing as a need for students within your school community? Only your staff can be able to answer that question. But like I said, it's really important that you still put funds aside for your supporting staff to receive professional development as well. Again, just because these people have master's degree, might have doctorate degrees and all of that, they still need to be getting information that's relevant and timely, that's teaching them about um, practices that are, like I said, up to date. The field changes so quick. Okay. So, my question is, in what ways could leadership provide more opportunities for professional learning on behavior topics that addresses school needs and also speaks specifically to each staff member's role? Again, in what ways could leadership provide more opportunities for professional learning on behavior topics that addresses school needs and also speaks specifically to staff members' roles? Okay. Again, now I also want to bring up that this is an opportunity for staff that actually know these topics. Remember, I talked about like the three basic concepts: the escalation cycle, impact of trauma in schools, processing student needs. This is an opportunity for the staff members who actually know a lot about those content topics to actually lead PD for those that don't know the concept well. Again, sometimes the differentiation in professional learning is some of your staff actually turning into the teacher. Okay. So I just wanted to bring that up. So building the adult capacity, very important. Now, the next part that I want to talk about in specifics, specifically with tier one, is strengthening the tier one. Now, a lot of times, especially with middle school, I feel like middle school will tend to say, we don't need to do much other than the handbook, because I hear the statement a lot of time from middle school staff of, oh, the kids should know better. They know better at this age, right? Well, just because they know better doesn't mean that they're practicing how to do better. And so, as a school and a school district, you have to be able to provide those opportunities for students to practice better or healthier behavior. It's just like, oh, well, the kids should know math, but are they practicing it? Okay, because if not, what we doing? Okay, so there's a couple of points that I want to bring up about strengthening tier one, and one of them is establishing how to address a student who's dysregulated. This is something that all staff should know. Again, school wide supports everybody from the gym teacher to the custodian to the bus drivers, establishing how to address a student who's dysregulated. Because again, your staff can either become a support, a connector, a barrier, or a hindrance to the things students need. So I'll give you an example. You might have a staff member that picks and chooses who they let to use the restroom. We all know somebody, okay? Based off of if they feel like that kid gonna play around, or oh, they feel like this student can be trusted X, Y, and Z. But that's an example of a staff member being a barrier to student needs, okay? Regardless of why they do it, but that could be a barrier. In a different example, you might have a staff member that will send a message to a student safe person when the child is struggling. In this example, that staff member is being a connector. They're connecting the student to somebody else who may be able to better meet their needs. So, again, staff could be a support, a connector, a barrier, or a hindrance. Now, even with all of that said, there should be some uniformity in the tools and resources that students have access to. And that's why, like I said, understanding where everybody is or having common expectations about how do we support a student who's dysregulated helps us keep that in check, because all students need access to whatever supports that they need. Okay. Without it, students will start calling out injustice, favoritism, and power imbalances, and likely rebel. And specifically, like I said, with my older elementary, third, fourth, fifth, and then middle school, we tend to see that a lot. So, for example, we had a classroom one year where the students were purposely giving the teacher a hard time. They felt like she was always playing favorites, not acknowledging when students were doing the right thing. And so they were like, we are going to give this lady the business. And every day they was just like, we can't stand this lady. So, like I said, we want to create the uniformity so that we're avoiding those type of situations. Now, also with strengthening tier one, all staff should know who to contact and when to contact somebody when a student is showing warning signs of mental or behavioral challenges. You would think that people would kind of already know, but I'm telling you, some of the most um, basic signs people just aren't thinking about, maybe because they're doing so many different things. But we've had situations before, and I'll give a trigger warning for self-harm. I'm going to talk about that for the next 30 seconds. But in two different schools that I worked at, we've had situations where a student would self-harm, right? It would be a big situation. Now we got to take the student, we got to do an assessment. But then talking with the teacher, they were like, oh, yeah, well, I did see the student trying to strangle themselves with their hoodie days before that. Or I saw the student swiping their arms with scissors days before. And it was like, you didn't tell anybody? Like, ding, 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 big red flashing signs. You need to tell somebody. So again, all staff need to know who to contact and when to contact, even if that contact is as simple as a group email with your counselor, your social worker, X, Y, and Z, however you decide on it. But that needs to be clear across the board. Also, with strengthening tier one is establishing the social emotional practices you'll adopt to build skills for all students all school year. So, like I said, we're in that honeymoon phase right now. It's the beginning of the school year, and we always hear build relationships, build relationships. But it can't just be in that first 2 weeks. This is something that has to be ingrained in your schedule. It needs to be ingrained in your content, your curriculum. Like, it needs to be an essential part of what you're doing. Like I said, especially for schools who are having challenges with behavior or a lot of mental health crises. You have to ingrain it so that we're not always, like I said, responding to student incidents at peak. We have to be able to provide, again, those social emotional skills up front and consistently throughout the school year. So you can address and teach positive behaviors that are relevant to the challenges you are seeing in your school. So here's what I typically see done. I see typically a school district or a school specifically will invest into a social emotional curriculum or a platform. Okay, so character strong, second step, all of that. And then some might adopt the scope and sequence that's already laid out by the company. Some will devise or create their own scope and sequence on their own. However, my thing is, you gotta be more specific. I always say the scope and sequence is a base, or the content that you have is a base, but the actual facilitation of the content needs to be relevant to what is happening in your school. If you're having specific problems at your school, you need to be providing specific content. Just saying. So, in example, we've had, or I've experienced, we had a specific grade level that was going out to recess and they were doing inappropriate touching. And so that was something that we provided specific content on so that we were giving the skills to everyone in that grade about what was appropriate, what was inappropriate, how to, reach out to people when you saw those type of things happening, setting boundaries, okay, all of that. Now, in some other examples, and I'm pretty sure we've all experienced this, is having a grade level that was having a lot of conflict and fights at recess. Again, we were able to go into the classroom, well, bring the grade level together and fine tune the content about conflict resolution to specifically touch on how are we going to handle conflicts at recess. Because, okay, we know games are going to get heated and maybe rules ain't all the same, but again, how can we handle conflict in a healthy way? Okay, so you see how I'm taking that basic content of conflict resolution and we're making more specific to, let's talk about how we can work through conflict at recess. So, out of establishing your student response system, knowing when to reach out about warning signs, and establishing social emotional practices, which would be the lightest lift for your school? Let me repeat those. Again, the choices were establishing your student response system, knowing when to reach out about warning signs, and establishing social emotional practices. Which of these would be the lightest lift for your school? Because in some instances, the concept might be there, but it might be underdeveloped. In other concepts, it might not be there at all. It might be non-existent, and it's something that you need to build on. Maybe you've had some turnover. Maybe you've had new leadership come in, and now you need to establish those things. But that's something that you would need to take your time on. Just be aware that, hey, this is a foundation of tier one or school-wide supports, and we need to make a plan so that by the end of the school year, or at least throughout the school year, we are developing these things. Okay. So we've talked about tier one, but now I want to talk on the other end about tier three, because right now, like I said, we're flipping the triangle right now. And that's how a lot of schools are looking, where that triangle is flipped and we have all these referrals. Oh, this person needs all this intensive support. But again, remember, we got to build that foundation, that tier one. Now, if you don't know Tier three supports are only supposed to be for 1 to 5% of your student population. Again, tier three supports 1 to 5% of your population. So if you currently have half of your students that are either receiving or on a waiting list for therapy, there are probably some other supports that can be provided at the school to support your students before we even get to the therapy, okay? Or before we even get to a spare referral. There's probably some other supports that you could be providing with the support staff that you already have, or even with the teaching staff that you already have that have not been done yet. Okay. So, in particular, when we talk about behavior, though, instead of asking what's the next consequence, right? Because if we're feeling like, oh, this student needs intense support, we get to, oh, how can we keep hold them accountable? How can we hold them accountable? And a lot of times people think of consequences, right? But before referring them up to tier three, we need to be examining what support has been given thus far. Not what consequence, but what support has been given thus far. And I define support as an act of service that intentionally addresses where you want the student to be through connection, teaching, modeling, regulation, and so forth. So, how can we attempt to support the student first? So, I actually dropped down in the comments a resource for tier one strategies. I actually also have a resource for tier two and tier three strategies because, again, sometimes we just need a reminder of what could we try before we get to that referral, right? What could we be doing at tier one and tier two first? So again, that's a free resource, at least the tier one strategies, and then I have tier two and tier three that's available as well too. So one of the parts of that of understanding like what are we doing first is that you need to strengthen your student intervention process. And I feel so passionate about that because that was like a special project for me at my first district. I didn't know that that was going to be my role or capacity, but I did my studying so that I could figure out how to provide the best student intervention process that I could. Okay. But in the schools following or the districts following, that was a consistent. And even when I talk to other supporting staff, when I'm going out and I'm doing training and professional development, they telling me that y'all ain't really got no strong student intervention process. So it needs to have clear steps, a clear referral process, estimated wait time. Like those things need to be clear. And if you don't have it, that probably needs to be a goal that's in your comprehensive plan. Because how you referring people to therapy and y'all ain't even did a process. Especially with SPED, because like I said, I have built very strong partnerships with SPED staff, and I will talk with them, especially the school psychologist, the person who has to do the kind of like the intake and the referral. But I'll ask them like, what type of data are they looking for? What type of documentation? All of that. And when you do the student intervention process um, with fidelity, it makes it so much easier for them to process your referral. So I just want to put that out there. When tier three actually is warranted, being specific about what type of support that the student needs. So I know that a lot of times, especially if we have a student who is physically like they're tearing up classrooms or they're fighting people and this, that, and third, we want to rush and be like, oh, this is an emergency and X, Y, and Z. But that takes really getting to know the student, their family, or their support that they have, what experiences they've had before then, to kind of know, okay, what actually would be a support that's helpful for that student. And that's why I say that me specifically, I'm not really an advocate for having a resource bank, just because I don't believe that because A happened that B should be the support every single time. It has to be fine tuned to the specific student if you want to see certain results. So, like I said, don't just throw a student to therapy because their anger is off the charts and they keep getting into it with their classroom teacher. That could be a mediation with the teacher or building a relationship with their teacher first. Like there's other supports that could be happening, but also when you're specific about the support that the student needs, it helps your partner. So your therapeutic partners, right? It helps them build goals with the student. Okay. So, my last point I want to talk about when we're saying being intentional with tier three is to be open to revising your MOUs with your partners. So, you need to ask for services that align with where your school community is currently at. Just because you have a partnership with a community health organization and that partner may be able to uh, do 50 different things does not mean that you need to sign on to do 50 different things, because that's going to either overwhelm your staff that is managing that partnership. It's going to potentially overwhelm your students if you're signing up for something that maybe doesn't necessarily align with the need that they have. But it also might stretch your partner thin if they're trying to fulfill services for something where they're already short with staff. Like, be specific. And like I said, you have the opportunity to say, actually, this is what we need this school year. Here's our data from last year. Here's where we want to put some focus on. And based off of the trends, I think that this is where we're going to need focus on our partnership together. Because I will say, most of the time, your partners are really open to being flexible and moving what they're providing for you. But if you're just rinse and repeat and signing off on the same services every single year, you may not even need that. You might actually need something different. Okay? So I'm just saying, we got to be more intentional and not just signing the dotted line because it's a new school year and it's the same dang on MOU with a different date. Just saying. Because also, too, that's an opportunity for you to either reach out and find other partners that may more specifically align to your student needs, or to, like I said, ask your already existing partners for some other services that may not have been initially included in the MOU. So, my question is, in what ways can you be more intentional with your use of tier three services? I know I named about four different ways, but for your school setting specifically, what ways can you be more intentional with your use of tier three services? If you want to think more about this, this is why I created the free student support readiness survey. It is a 5-minute assessment that helps you reflect on where your student support is strong and where your opportunities for growth are. So I'm very passionate about this conversation. I hope to have dialogue more about this topic. Feel free to hit me in the DMs about it. And again, that tier one resource is in the comments. And again, that student support readiness survey, 5 minutes, 5 minutes of your time. So thank you all for joining me this evening, and I hope to see you next week.